The nursery smelled of antiseptic and too strong coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed like a low apology. A tiny human voice filled the room, raw and steady, a thin, angry trumpet that refused to be argued with. It had been 5 hours. It had been 10. Machines ticked, monitors blinked, nurses rotated like worried planets. Nothing calmed him. "I can't take this anymore," his father said, voice tight and unfamiliar even to himself. He hadn't known his own voice could sound that small. He had been used to deals, to numbers, to commanding rooms. Money bought silence in boardrooms, but it could not buy a quiet baby. "Try the swing again," someone suggested. "Try skin to skin," another offered. "They've tried every pamphlet and protocol." The infant's cheeks were red, fists clenched like tiny secrets. "I want him quiet," the man said, not a question. He paced the length of the visitor's bench, his tie loosened, a coat draped over a chair like a second skin he didn't know how to remove. The nurse who had been there since the baby was born withered a little each time the cry rose and crashed into the ceiling. "He is well. He is getting his feeds. There is no fever. There is no sign of infection. We have run the routine checks," the pediatrician said. "We can bring in the neonatal specialist if the crying continues. We will not let him go without answers." The man pressed his palm to the plastic of the incubator and looked down at the wrinkled, furious person inside. The baby's mouth opened, a sound that felt like a raw alarm. The father closed his eyes and thought of all the ways he had failed people that mattered, none of them as small, none of them as relentless as his own heartbeat in this fluorescent room. Then someone in the doorway paused, and the room leaned without noticing. She was not a nurse. She wore no badge, no stethoscope. Her jacket was a little too thin for the hospital's temperature, the sleeves cuffed at elbow by someone used to work that involved hands. She moved like someone who had learned to be careful about where she put her feet. Her hair was pulled back, and she had the look of a person who had learned the rules of the world the hard way and then decided to keep her own. "Excuse me," she said softly. She had a voice that fit the tone of the room, low and steady. "I was passing by. I heard the baby." "We have everything under control," the nurse said quickly, the reflex of white coats and training. "Please," the woman said. "May I?" There was a pause where the man's pride and exhaustion traded places. He had been as rich as the sky, used to opening doors with a nod and having people step aside. He hesitated now, in the presence of a stranger whose eyes held an unexpected calm. "Do it," he said finally, and it sounded less commanding than pleading. She walked to the incubator like a pianist approaching an instrument. The baby howled. She unzipped a bag she had slung over her shoulder, and from it she withdrew a small, faded cloth. It might have been a handkerchief. It might have been a lullaby wrapped in fabric. She warmed it between her palms the way you warm a memory between fingers. The room watched. The man realized his breath was held somewhere at the top of his chest. She lifted the baby out as if she had been doing it all her life, though her hands were the hands of someone who had carried many burdens. She cradled him against the crook of her arm and began to hum. It wasn't a lullaby, the father knew. It wasn't anything in sheet music or silver spoons. The tune was spare and old, a soft swing of notes that moved like someone rocking a boat in moonlight. The sound was so simple and the woman's voice so sure that the machines barely registered it, until the baby stilled. The first cry became a hiccup, and the hiccup leaned into silence. The baby's eyelids flickered, then shut. A room full of trained professionals forgot the next line of their scripts and listened. "Where did you learn that?" the mother asked, voice stitched with relief and disbelief. She smiled without showing teeth. "My mother sang it to me. She sang it to anyone who needed to sleep." The man watched the woman's face and tried to find the distance between her hands and this sleeping child. He felt a strange new anxiety, relief, like a tide pulling back, revealing something in the sand. "How did you?" she asked again insistently. "How did you know that would work?" It was nothing she had read in a book, the woman said. It was everything she'd learned at night, with a kettle on and a baby on her chest who wouldn't stop crying. She'd learned to listen for what the child was asking. Sometimes a cry meant hunger, sometimes cold, sometimes a wet diaper, sometimes pain. Sometimes it meant a heart that had forgotten how to trust. "Do you work here?" the nurse asked. "No," she said. "I don't, but I used to. I worked nights in birthing wards at hospitals around here. I left when my mother got sick. I come when I can." The man felt his forehead go slick. Small things had ceased to be small for him. This woman had soothed his baby by humming some lonesome melody, and without planning it he found himself wanting to know where she had been all his life. He took the baby from her carefully, as if all his fortunes could fit inside the swaddle. The infant slept, breathing tiny, perfect breath. The man's suit felt suddenly like something manufactured for a life he had outgrown. He sat down, and the weight of the child's stillness in his arms felt heavier than any ledger. If anyone would like to, we should run more tests, the pediatrician suggested. We know, the man said. Not now. Not while he sleeps. The woman watched him watch the baby. Then she did something she had not planned to do. Her fingers fidgeted around the strap of her bag. She pulled out, with a hesitancy that belonged to someone revealing a scar, a small, tarnished locket. It hung from a chain like a secret. The chain was old. The locket's photograph inside was yellowed with time. A younger woman with a tired, luminous face, a small child in her arms, a hospital bracelet snapped on the child's wrist. A name, a date. The tiniest of things, but in it the world altered. Her hands were steady when she opened it. Look, she said, and the words were not loud but heavy with history. The man rose as if someone had told him to. He had, in some other life, thrown away parts of himself like confetti. He had signed papers without reading them. He had believed absence could fix itself with wealth. He had been wrong. He leaned in because the edges of the photograph were familiar like a ghost of an old song. The woman closed the locket and held it out for him. My daughter's name was Lila, she said. She used to tell me stories about a man who would one day be great. She told me she would name her boy after him if he wanted her to. She told me she hoped he'd come back. He did not. She kept him. She kept her promise to him. She didn't tell me she was dying until it was too late. The man felt like air had been stolen from him. He remembered a summer, an apartment that smelled of coffee and rain, a woman laughing like thunder. He remembered a promise he had been too young to keep. He remembered thinking he'd find his way back before the world closed. We looked for you, the woman continued. She hugged that baby like he was the whole of something unfinished. Years passed. We learned to make do. We learned to live without your name on our tongues. We learned to make small mercies last. The room had gone quiet like a held breath. The man's palms dampened against the blanket. He imagined a list of all the things he had scheduled and ordered for the past 2 decades. None of them contained the warmth of a lullaby hummed between 2 women in a paint-chipped apartment. None of them had the texture of a promise that keeps a person whole. Why are you telling me this now? He asked, but his voice didn't carry the accusation he thought it would. It came out softer, rounded by absolute bewilderment. She looked at the sleeping baby, then at him, and something like pity and something like purpose crossed her face. Because sometimes life makes you stand in a hospital doorway and listen. Because your son. Because the man had a son once and she had thought it would stay buried. Because she had seen the way the baby's mouth curled when he fell asleep, the same way a certain photograph showed years ago, and because your name is on the bracelet in this old picture and your face was once the warmth to which someone's tiny world turned, she said. Because I couldn't keep the secret any longer. Air left the room like an exhale. The man felt the blood drain from his face in a tide that began at his hairline and traveled in cold rings. He had built empires from arrogance. He had thought himself untouchable by the small tragedies of other people's lives. He had been given a child recently, a child he loved, but he had also been given a memory he had never let live. What are you saying? His voice had the brittle quality of someone being read a verdict. She didn't want to cause harm. She had no taste for theatrics. She wanted only what was right for the child. I'm saying this. 36 years ago your name was on a bracelet that belonged to a newborn in this very hospital. Lila told me things. She told me the name of the father. She told me not to tell you, that you were making a life and you would come back. She trusted you. She taught that baby a lullaby. That baby is gone. We kept that locket and that lullaby because we needed both. But tonight, when I walked by and heard the cry, something in the baby's sound, the way his mouth opened, the way his hands clenched, it was like a memory passed down. It is not a certainty. It is not proof. But it is enough to make me come here and show you this. The man's breathing hitched like a pulled string. A lawyer's mind is trained to demand documents, evidence, signatures. Proof. He had none. Only a photograph yellowed at the edges and the sudden horrible recognition that some things do not require paper to be true. Could you be mistaken? He asked because asking seemed safer than admitting his heart had been replaced by a hollow. She looked at him as though she had been asked that question many times. I could be, she admitted. I have been wrong before. But I have learned to trust what mothers tell me. And tonight I trusted the lullaby. The father sat down again. He held the sleeping baby and let the weight settle. The man's palms began to tremble. He thought of an old diary he had never kept, of a face he had promised to remember. He thought of the small cruelty of forgetting. He thought of all the things money could not fix. We can do a test, someone said, gentle, almost mechanical. The pediatrician's face was a map of protocols and care. DNA would answer the question that had suddenly grown teeth in the room. It would clarify. It would complicate. It would, at the very least, replace rumor with certainty. Do it, the man said, though in that single syllable there were 1,000 apologies he had not yet formed. His voice hitched on the way of someone in a great house learning how to open the door of a past that had been boarded up. The woman watched him with something like relief and sorrow braided together. She had not come there to expose him. She had come there because a child cried and something inside her recognized the shape of a broken promise. She reached out briefly and touched his wrist as if to steady him. You should know, she said quietly, that the truth, whatever it is, will not make everything easier. It will make things different. It may hurt. It may heal. It will be what it is. But he deserves to be known.